observation.
But when people derive on parts of consciousness of what is happening in the material world, that we see that people tend to get into what are called exercises of bhavana or meditation. Now, isn't that a mechanic of controlling the mind, or is it something beyond? What is bhavana? What is meditation?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the different types of meditation. One is called the tranquility meditation, where we try to achieve peace of mind through different kinds of techniques, such as the repetition of a mantra or a visualization, or the replacing of your thoughts by some positive thoughts, or developing the quality of, for instance, universal loving kindness or compassion. Those are all good, but it is in a way a reconditioning process, whereas the practice of mindfulness as another form of meditation is not so much concerned with the restructuring of your mind by some kind of effort or idea, but through the practice of mindfulness, the awareness of what is actually happening, one does get an insight into the what we call the changing nature of everything, the unsatisfactory nature of conditioned existence, and also the insubstantiality or the emptiness of the phenomena. And therefore, we do have an effect on our minds in the sense it reduces greed, hatred, and also, hopefully, delusion. Through the overcoming of delusion, it tends to start to see the things as they really are, and then decrease greed and hatred. Now, greed and hatred are two of the main factors in the world for a lot of conflicts.
And you're saying that, in a way, you're saying greed and hatred means moving slowly away from needs and wants as well.
Overcoming of greed and hatred can be substituted, the greed and hatred can be substituted by a sense of satisfaction within oneself, for instance. We don't always need to have everything in order to feel happy. Sometimes the overcoming of the greed for something can be a much happier experience than the actually getting of a material thing, like a toy, or a car, or a trip to the moon.
So, what do people need or want in a world in the future? Can they have what they are having today? Can that greed sustain? Or do we need to find another path that can sustain human life on earth? Or do we need to sustain human life on earth?
Well, that last question I would like to leave as a koan up in the air, but whether we can actually replace different kinds of needs of people and the greeds of people, I suppose yes. Now, for instance, if everybody would like to have a second car and a third television and, a fourth mobile phone and a house somewhere abroad and then a private plane, for instance, now that is not sustainable. You see, the report to the Club of Rome, in the 60s already said there are limits to growth, and they had different scenarios, the worst case scenario, the medium scenario, and the best case scenario, and all those scenarios showed that there is a certain limitation to growth if it is just in the material sense.
In 2002 in Johannesburg, 10 years after the Rio Earth Summit, the United Nations comprehended saying that one of the greatest challenges of humanity today is regulating unsustainable consumption and production patterns. And the world is now trying to comprehend how to achieve sustainable consumption and production patterns. How do we relate mindfulness towards this end of trying to achieve sustainable consumption and production?
Well, mindfulness can help us to reduce our greed and to realize what we really need, I suppose. Now, there's a very little poem which I like very much, which was once composed by an ex-Buddhist monk from Holland. It says, "He who knows his need, whatever be his creed, he is a saint indeed. He who knows his need without having any greed Whatever be his creed, he is a saint indeed. So whatever you may think, if you can overcome your greed. Now, Mahatma Gandhi also said there is enough for everybody's need, but not for everybody's greed in this world. So that may be very true, you see. But of course we can find new technologies, and science is also working on reducing, for instance, the need for a lot of iron or unreplenishable resources such as oil and other kind of things. We can replace a lot of materials and also reduce the size, for instance, of materials needed. To build a bridge those days, they needed tons and tons and tons of iron and steel. Nowadays they can do with much less and have the same or even a better result. But with the increase of the population in the world, well, there are all kinds of dangers also lurking with AIDS, for instance, in Africa might decimate the population sometimes in the future, and unforeseeable consequences on the economy also, and all kinds of other events which we cannot really calculate. But anyway, just China and India alone, and then Europe and the United States, let's say, those as the main economies in the world. If every individual wants more and more material things, then of course there is going to be a big problem.